If you're anything like me, you don't have easy access to a wide pool of players. And for many of us, being in a small scene or having only a small group of opponents makes it really difficult to make meaningful progress because we either outgrow our competition or stagnate for having become effective and specialized at fighting that small group of players and no one else. Being isolated like this might seem like a death sentence to your Smash dreams, but we are not totally without options. Having easy access to diverse and high-quality competition is certainly the easiest, most convenient, and effective way to level up, but there's nothing magical about high-level competition such that we can't figure out what we get from it and recreate that to some degree independently. Though you walk away from a few rounds with better or more diverse players with a sense of improvement, there are two distinct kinds of progress that occur as you play that come together to the end result of overall improvement. First of which is conceptual progress, which is basically awareness of different options and higher level strategies. Second of which is mechanical progress, which is the ability to effectively implement counterplay to those options and strategies. When you play better and more diverse people, these two facets of progress come together without you explicitly realizing they're separate. To visualize the effect good competition has on us, imagine what happens when you pour water on clay versus when you pour it on sand. The water is going to have a hard time passing through clay, but it'll pass through sand pretty easily. At high levels of play, fewer strategies work. Less water passes through clay, and only things that work in principle, rather than things that work because of ignorance or errors on your local competition's part, will make it through against better competition. Compared to subpar local competition that might not explicitly prompt you to generate better ideas and strategies, and as such more things fly, more water passes through the sand. In other words, if high-level competition acts as a strainer for good and bad ideas, then we need to do our own straining. The next question then is, how do we simulate or recreate that straining process without actually having easily accessible high-level competition? Remember, we have two kinds of progress, conceptual and mechanical, so accordingly, we'll need two things to supplement these. We'll need videos of high or top-level players, preferably playing against your character, though that isn't entirely necessary, to compare how different and preferably better players deal with your character or what they're capable of in general. And someone who's at least moderately competent at the game. Now, the natural question here is, what good does simply watching videos and practicing against the same old, moderately competent players do us? These two separately don't do us much good, rather we need to combine them through shadowboxing. Shadowboxing, for those who aren't familiar, is a martial arts training method based on visualizing and fighting an opponent that isn't actually there. Intuitively, we picture shadowboxing as some dude throwing hands at his reflection in the mirror, but the purpose and usefulness of such a thing isn't always obvious and might even seem a little stupid or pointless at times. Shadowboxing isn't just throwing punches at a dead reflection though, but pretending that reflection is about to do something it's not. Your sparring partner might not have a good right hook, but a good boxer has to be prepared for good right hooks anyway. Extending this concept to Smash, your local competition may not play optimally, but you need to be prepared for optimal play anyway. So, how do we prepare ourselves for the moment a big right hook is coming at us or a scary but DIable Pichu string if neither of these ever actually happens because the people we normally play just don't do them? We pretend as if they're about to do them and act accordingly. Let's walk through an example to make sense of all this. Say we have our top player video and as a point of comparison, what our local competition does. Let's say our local Pichu responds to Ganon's forward air on shield by shield grabbing. Now let's say the higher level example responds by using forward air out of shield. The first step here is to be critical of the fact that even though we may slam our local Pichu for his shield grab attempts and win for it, this is, with the exception of having an extremely good reason to shield grab instead of forward airing, an inherently flawed option, while the forward air isn't, or at least is less so. Being critical of whether something works in principle or whether we skate by on circumstantial or suboptimal counterplay already puts us well on the path to leveling up. But our job isn't done until we're actionably prepared to deal with more optimal plays, which is where our local guys come in for some shadowboxing. We're now aware of the fact that forward air out of shield is a more likely option at higher levels, yet our local Pichu is still going to shield grab whenever we hit his shield with forward air. So when we hit his shield, even though we know he's not going to forward air out of shield, we can pretend and visualize that that's exactly what's going to happen and act accordingly so that we can start to train our minds and hands to be ready for the time when we fight a Pichu who does forward air out of shield. Personally, my most recent form of shadowboxing involves ledge trapping. A Sonic in my region uses homing attack from the ledge almost 100% of the time, yet I frequently use times when I get him on the ledge as opportunities to visualize that he'll either ledge jump or ledge roll, so that I can practice my positioning and option coverage, in spite of the fact that I could easily just forward smash him every time. One final linchpin for shadowboxing to be productive is that we have to identify when exactly the thing in question we're pretending will happen in fact happens, so we can know when to switch gears into pretend mode. We need points of reference, in other words. In the Pichu example, the point of reference was hitting Pichu's shield. Once I've identified this point of reference, I can actively fish to hit Pichu's shield for opportunities to shadowbox. Likewise, in the Sonic example, the point of reference was when he was on the ledge. This said, the notion of reference points sheds light on a detail that's critical to the success of a shadowboxing approach. You can't really shadowbox by yourself. Having a live opponent is important for the same reason training mode combos aren't even 1,000th as impressive as they are in an actual match. You need to be able to recognize the time for and execute new ideas instantaneously in response to rapid stimuli. Much of what motivates our decision making is context. An emotionless training dummy or a contrived scenario where you ask your partner to stand and act just so give you a vacuum, as well as plenty of time to carefully plan out your inputs and visualizations, which you won't have in a live session. Now, this has all been a very impressive chunk of info, so recap time. Compare what different people do compared to your local competition. Think of how you deal with what you observed others do. In order to make your goal definite and measurable, identify when exactly the observed strategy or option happens. Find a point of reference, in other words. Fish for those points of reference so you can know to switch into pretend mode. Then shadowbox, i.e., act as if what you're visualizing will actually happen. The downside to all of this, as many of you were likely quick to note, is that it's tough to be 100% certain that your shadowboxing counterplay will work or be as effective as you hope. This said, within the realm of what's practical, there really is no genuine substitute for hands-on, concrete experience. But if we're creative and shadowbox intelligently with what competition we do have, we can at least raise our ceiling a little higher. At that, I'm fairly confident I've said all that I can about shadowboxing, at least such that it'll be productive. Personally speaking, I've lived in rural Oregon for 8 years now, and in that time I feel like I've enjoyed fairly steady and sometimes even dramatic improvement, and I attribute much of that to the concepts put forth in this video, namely shadowboxing. It's not a perfect method, but for me at least, it kept the cement from drying around my feet. It takes some creativity and deliberate, fun comes later practice to put pretending to paint, but I do have faith in this approach. Anyway, thank you guys as always for taking time out of your day to hear my ideas. On the topic of thanks, a lot of you guys pulled a lot of weight for me in the summit voting, and I honestly wish that I knew how to properly thank you guys for supporting me as much as you did. What was initially an excuse to be theatrical and just have fun turned into a feasible reality of making it into summit thanks to you guys. So for that, I'm an incredibly lucky dude. And before I go, on the topic of support, I finally decided to make a Patreon, having gotten a lot of requests for coaching, set analyses, SmashConceptions, and so forth in recent months. I didn't have a framework for these kinds of things, but I strongly prefer the give what you want model, so to speak. So if this channel's helped you at all and the spirit compels you to support it, I'd be honored. And you can find the link to that as well as my Twitter in the video description. At that, I hope you guys look forward to the next video.